If you look at the NFL schedule, you might notice something when it comes to Week 17. Every game that takes place during the final week of the season has been between two teams in the same division. And it's been this way for a decade now. If you're the Steelers, you can only play the Ravens, Bengals, or Browns during the last week of the season. It has to stay within the division. And in many ways, this makes sense. If every game is a divisional game, then not only are the stakes higher, but the odds that the game means something are increased. There's a really good chance that at least one game per season will be a winner-take-all game for the division title. But it didn't always used to be like that. Before 2010, Week 17 was treated just the same as every other week, where you could play anyone. Theoretically, if you were the Steelers, you could play the 49ers on the final week of the season. And it was this way for a really, really long time. So what led the NFL changing the way that they structure the last week of the season? You can thank the New York Jets for that. This is the story of how the 2009 New York Jets made the playoffs, and how the impact of this postseason appearance changed NFL history forever. December 20th, 2009. The AFC is completely up for grabs when it comes to the wild card. There's 8 teams in the conference vying for 2 spots. The Tennessee Titans, after starting 0-6, are somehow one of them. Wasn't the first time they made a remarkable midseason turnaround that almost resulted in a playoff appearance. I made a video about that if you want to check that out. But more importantly for our story today, the New York Jets are one of these teams in the mix. Led by first-year head coach Rex Ryan, rookie quarterback Mark Sanchez, and a defense that was the best in football, they were looking to get back into the playoffs for the first time since 2006. But things are not looking so good for the Jets right now. Because on this December day, after it seemed like a win against the Falcons was locked up, they couldn't get the job done. A field goal by Jay Feely to make it a 7-point game was blocked. Then, the league's best defense couldn't stop Matt Ryan and company from driving down the field to score the game-winning touchdown. In the penultimate game that the Jets would ever play at Giants Stadium, it ended in disaster. New York lost 10-7 and fell to 500 with just 2 games left to play. The odds that they would make the playoffs were slim. They needed a lot of help. Even head coach Rex Ryan shut the door on the team's playoff hopes. That's how unlikely it was that the Jets would wind up making it. And Rex Ryan had a very good reason to be pessimistic. They were about to go into Lucas Oil Stadium and take on Peyton Manning and the Indianapolis Colts. The undefeated Indianapolis Colts. This was an Indy team led by an MVP quarterback. Not only was Peyton Manning dominating teams all season long, but he was coming off of his best game of the season, and at the time, arguably one of the best games of his career. In a primetime game on Thursday Night Football against the Jacksonville Jaguars, Manning threw for 308 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a season-high passer rating of 134.4 as the Colts beat the Jaguars 35-31. And yes, I still had vivid memories being at that game, including but not limited to Reggie Nelson not knowing how to tackle, and David Garrard somehow overthrowing Mercedes Lewis on the final drive of the game. But basically, the Colts were red hot. Nobody expected the Jets to beat Peyton Manning. And they were right. Because in the third quarter, Peyton Manning led a touchdown drive culminating in a 1-yard touchdown run by Donald Brown. Indianapolis led 15-10 midway through the third, and it was looking like the Colts were going to win this one. That was until Peyton Manning got benched. Head coach Jim Caldwell benched a lot of the starters. Indy had locked up the number 1 seed at this point, so they sacrificed an undefeated season in order to prevent injuries and have a shot at a Super Bowl run. A small price to pay for salvation, I guess. But this meant that Curtis Painter entered the game for the Colts at quarterback. And the Jets feasted. Painter had almost as bad of a game as you could possibly have. He went 4 for 11 with an interception, a lost fumble, 2 sacks, and a passer rating of 11.2. New York ended up winning this one 29-15, and somehow controlled their own destiny entering the final week of the season. So what was the Jets' win-in scenario? In what would be the final game ever played at Giants Stadium, all they had to do was beat the Cincinnati Bengals. But entering that game, the Bengals had the option to choose their opponent for the playoffs. They had clinched the AFC North. If they won against the Jets, then they'd get the number 3 seed and would have to play the Texans. When Cincy and Houston played earlier in the season though, Houston dominated. They won big time when it came to first downs, time of possession, and total yards, and the Texans won 28-17 at Paul Brown Stadium. But if the Bengals wanted to, they could lose the game and play the Jets. The Jets had to go all out in this game because they were fighting for their playoff lives. The Bengals weren't. New York would have to play all their starters and show their playbook. Cincinnati, meanwhile, could rest their starters, giving them what would be in essence a bye week, and could learn what the Jets were going to do while not having to show off anything that they were going to do. So that's pretty much what they did. Cincinnati rested some guys, played JT O'Sullivan at quarterback in the second half, and got shut out 37-0. The Jets had done the unthinkable. They had made the playoffs. After Rex Ryan declared them to be eliminated, the Jets made it and were playing January football. And the Jets ended up making a good run into the postseason. They beat Cincinnati the following week in the wildcard round, showing once again that 3 guarantees in life are death, taxes, and Marvin Lewis losing immediately in the playoffs. And then they stunned the San Diego Chargers in the divisional round, advancing to the AFC Championship for the first time since 1998. This time, they gave Indy a run for their money, though the Colts ended up winning and advancing to Super Bowl 44. But despite all of that, there were many people that had a problem with the way the Jets got into the playoffs. They got in by playing essentially glorified preseason teams. The Colts rested their starters in the second half of Week 16. The Bengals played a squad of backups for much of the Week 17 game. The Jets got in arguably not because of their own merit, but because of fortunate scheduling because the other teams didn't have anything to play for. And one of these people that was unhappy was Commissioner Roger Goodell. He saw this trend of what was happening, and he didn't like it one bit. And Goodell knew he needed a plan to prevent a situation like what happened with the 2009 Jets from ever happening again. Roger Goodell noticed that a bunch of teams were resting their starters in the final week of the season. Not only did the Bengals rest their starters against the Jets, but so did the Colts against the Bills. It also didn't help that the Patriots actually played their starters against the Texans with really not much to play for, and it backfired spectacularly, as they lost in the wildcard round the following week, and lost Wes Welker during the Texans game with an injury. Goodell needed to act fast. So he proposed one solution, which was to reward teams who played their starters in Week 17. If you were a playoff team and you didn't rest your guys, you would get an extra draft pick. There are many reasons why this is a horrible idea. I'm going to rattle off just a few of them, but it should be obvious from the onset as to why this idea might not be ideal. Number 1, the rich get richer. Giving good teams even more draft picks just by virtue of being good does not help parity at all. Number 2, on good teams, if you give an extra 7th round pick, it probably doesn't matter. They're not going to make the team. But if you give higher picks like a 4th or a 5th, then again, the pendulum swings and the rich get richer just by virtue of being good. Also, suppose there's a scenario where a team rests their starters after being up 31-0 at the half. That team wouldn't get a pick, while the team that plays their starters the whole time in a close game would. And that doesn't seem to make much sense. Plus, you could also see teams faking their injury report by making it seem like they're not actually resting guys. You get the picture. Fortunately, I think this was just a case of Goodell spitballing possibilities, because this idea has not seen the light of day since January of 2010. Instead, what Goodell decided to do for future seasons was change the schedule. When the schedule for the upcoming 2010 season came out that April, Week 17 consisted of nothing but divisional matchups. The idea, aside from trying to get more meaningful games in Week 17, was so that teams would have no real incentive to rest their starters. A team like the Packers, for instance, if they had nothing to play for entering the playoffs, may have rested their starters going up against the Dolphins or the Rams. But going up against a heated rival like the Bears or the Vikings? Maybe not. And there have been instances under this new system where a team had nothing to play for, and because it was a divisional opponent, they decided to play their guys. Just as an example, in 2017, the Jacksonville Jaguars had locked up the number 3 seed. Their seeding could not have been improved in any way whatsoever during that final week. But because they were playing the Tennessee Titans, they decided to play their starters. They wanted to knock their division rival out of the playoff picture. They wanted to avoid getting swept by the Titans for the first time since 2008. Now, it didn't matter in the end as the Titans won, but nevertheless, Jacksonville played their guys. Not sure they would have done that if they were playing the Cardinals or the Jets on that day. Now, Week 17 isn't perfect by any means whatsoever. There's still some things that I would change about Week 17, which will be a topic for a future video later. But it's a heck of a lot better than it was a decade ago, thanks to nothing but divisional games in the final week of the season. And you can thank the 2009 Jets, somewhat undeservingly, getting into the postseason for that change.